All right. Hi, everyone. Marissa Douglas, Atlantic Center for Independent Living's peer support specialist here. And today we're going to have a video about the ADA and the future of disability rights and disability justice. As you may have seen on all of our social media, we've been celebrating the ADA all month long, all of July, in honor of the 30th anniversary. Towards the end of July and the end of our celebration, we want to turn our attention away from, learning about the history of the ADA and celebrating the ADA and all that's done towards, where are we going from here? Because the ADA is amazing and we're very thankful for it. However, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and we want to talk about it and see what you think as well. Feel free to let us know in the comments what you think about where disability rights still needs to go. Start off by talking about what the ADA did do or does well. So first big thing is employment protections, and under the ADA, employers can no longer discriminate against a qualified candidate with disability. If they're in the hiring process and they figure out that one of their candidates has a disability, they can't refuse to hire them because of their disability. They can refuse to hire them if they are not qualified. A lot of people seem to have that misconception that if somebody with a disability applies for your job, you have to hire them. You don't. But if they're qualified, you can't not hire them just based on their disability status. And also, if you are currently employed by somebody, your employer has to give you a reasonable accommodation to help you fulfill your job. You have to be able to, fulfill the essential functions of the job with or without a reasonable accommodation. But if you're able to do it with a reasonable accommodation and you're qualified, they can't discriminate against you. Also, the ADA, big positive of it for a lot of people, especially those who were around before the ADA, is transportation. Before the ADA, buses weren't required to have lifts, and other modes of transportation weren't, required to be as accessible as possible. Drivers didn't have to pick up passengers with disabilities, but now they are required to do so, and buses do have to have lifts, and it's also created paratransit. So now transportation, is much more accessible than it previously was, due to the ADA. Also, it has made our communities a lot more accessible. I know I can go out of my house and see many sidewalks with curb cuts. Many businesses are accessible and provide a lot of access for their customers with disabilities. I know for me, one big thing that I always think about and appreciate is the fact that public schools are required to be accessible now. Many people I've talked to who are older than me and went to school before the ADA talk about how, when they were kids, they were bused to a school 5 miles away, or maybe even longer than that, just because they had a disability. And, their local school didn't want to accommodate them. They didn't want to put a ramp at the front entrance. They, just told them to go to a different school. And all the disabled kids went to one school, and all the non-disabled kids went to another. Didn't matter what your disability was, what kind of services they might have needed. There was, you just went to a different school if you had a disability. Uh, so those are some of the good things about the ADA and what it's done. Now let's talk about some of the holes in the ADA and some of the shortcomings of it, because it's great, but it's definitely not perfect. And to say so would be a disservice. So the biggest things that people talk about when they talk about the shortcomings of the ADA is the fact that there's not a lot of teeth to the ADA. There's not a lot of ways to mediate, problems and access, except for lawsuits. There's no real government oversight of the ADA, or government enforcement. It was written without that. So, that's a big thing where we have the protections, but no real way to enforce it. And especially in recent years, some people have gotten the impression that there's a lot of ADA drive-by lawsuits where people with disabilities or lawyers representing people with disabilities are just filing lawsuits that just don't have a lot of merit to them, just because. And that has led to some congressional attempts to weaken the ADA through something known as the ADA Reform Act. I believe that was back in 2017 was the last time they've tried to do it. So they haven't tried to do it too recently, but they essentially try to prevent people, or not prevent, but it increased the amount of time that you needed to wait to file a lawsuit from, before you didn't really need to wait. If you had a complaint, you could file a lawsuit, but then it made you wait 6 months, and there was a process you had to go through, whereas, and it just kind of weakened the protections because, it was kind of taking away our one way of enforcement. So that is definitely a big thing that people talk about with the ADA. Also, the ADA specifically legislates about public spaces, about our communities, and how our communities need to be accessible, how our schools need to be accessible, like I said, or our public transportation, or businesses, things like that. There's nothing, about housing in the ADA, because, again, it's not meant for private residences. And, a good portion of people with disabilities aren't helped by the ADA because they're homeless currently. The people with disabilities make up a good portion of the homeless population. It's a big issue because we just don't have affordable, accessible housing for people with disabilities, and that's not something that the ADA was meant to help. So that's definitely an issue we still have to work on. Also, there is a big, or a certain percent, I'm not exactly sure what percent of people with disabilities fall into this category, but there's a percent of people with disabilities that need long-term supports and services that they can't get right now. If they need personal care assistance or home health aides, insurance companies and especially Medicaid can refuse to pay for them at a certain point. Many states, Medicaid will tell you you need too much care or you need too many hours of care. You need to, or we're not going to pay for that. You need to go into a nursing home and have your care uh, provided for you there, or another long-term care facility, which, you know, brings me to another point of many people with disabilities feel conflicted about even celebrating the ADA this year. It's been something that I've been told many times by other advocates that, you know, we're supposed to be thankful for the ADA, but many people in nursing homes have passed away in recent months due to the coronavirus pandemic and the fact that nursing homes were not properly protected. And we still have Medicaid telling us to go live in these nursing homes where we're seeing people die at alarming rates. Um, and we're also seeing those nursing homes wanting criminal immunity from their neglect. So that is a huge thing that I just wanted to recognize because because I do know many people feel conflicted, and I share some of those sentiments. We're supposed to be celebrating, but there's currently a lot of issues going on, so we have to balance those two. Uh, but let's talk about also the solutions to um, these issues. Where does So we know what the ADA has done. We know what problems still exist, and there's more than what I laid out. That maybe we can talk about in another video. So where do we need to go? There's many different things that disability rights movement needs to do. That unfortunately I don't have the time to, talk about all of them. But let's talk about a few. I think one of the big things that the disability rights movement needs to focus on in the future is doing a lot more intersectional work, and that essentially means, recognizing that people with disabilities don't come in one shape and size. We come in multiple. We have people with disabilities who are all genders, um, all races and ethnicities, all sexualities, all income levels, all educational backgrounds, all religions, all everything. Every category of person, um, you know, has people with disabilities. Every other social group has people with disabilities in it. In addition to, just the fact that we all have different disabilities, so we all have different needs. I'm telling you this from the perspective of a wheelchair user. I mean, this is also stuff I've learned from listening to people with other disabilities, but a lot of it is also from my perspective as a wheelchair user. So we need to, make sure we're incorporating different voices in the disability rights movement, focusing on, different people, because different people with disabilities have different needs. Like, I'm also a woman with a disability. Women with disabilities face different issues than men with disabilities do. We have higher rates of violence. We, face a lot of discrimination in medical care due to both disability and gender, and many more issues. And then also in 2020, we've seen the Black Lives Matter movement get more public support and attention than it has, despite, it's been going on for several years. And there are Black people with disabilities in this country. And that's an important thing to talk about. You know, they're more likely to face the police violence that the movement is protesting against. Even though we're all people with disabilities, we have different experiences and needs. So I definitely think focusing on that is important going into the future, because the way I see it, if we're not fighting for all people with disabilities, who are we fighting for? We're not fighting for anybody. We're probably only fighting for ourselves, really. Also, another big thing, to wrap up this video, is a legislative solution in the Disability Integration Act, which is a law that was passed in Congress. No, it wasn't passed. What am I saying? It was not passed in Congress. That it is in Congress, waiting to be passed, to prevent some of that discrimination based on needing long-term supports and services. That I talked about earlier, a few minutes ago. Essentially what the act says is that Medicaid and other insurances can no longer just tell you, oh, you need too many services, you have to go live in a nursing home because that's the only place where you can live that we are going to pay for you to get these services. So it gives people the right to live in the community, and actually gives, enforceable ways to, to live in the community that, can be enforced. It also requires states to develop plans to not only just give the supports and fund the actual, like, home health care, personal care assistance, and other direct support that people with disabilities need, but also, like, the additional supports that you need to be able to live in the community, like affordable, accessible housing. Like I said, that is a big problem, and we need to be able to do something. So the Disability Integration Act requires states to make more investments in accessible housing so that people with disabilities can actually have somewhere to live in the community to receive their supports and live full integrated lives. So we're all looking forward to that being passed, and that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for listening to this video, watching this video. And tell us again what your experience with the ADA has been. Where do you think disability rights needs to go? I can only say so much, but we want to know from you, what work do you see that needs to be done? What needs, more enforcement, or what issues, what subset of the disability population needs more attention that we can help bring attention to. Alright, again, thank you, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.